Serious, what is the most paranormal or unexplainable events you have witnessed? I'll bring out this story again. It happened to me 7 years ago and I can't figure it out, but I lost an hour of time in what felt to me like minutes. At the time I was working from home after a serious illness diagnosis. I had settled into a routine. Up at 7 a.m. and do house stuff and shower, then at 8 a.m. start prepping my work and laying out my day. Phone calls and emails from 8 to 9. This is all I remember. It was 7:55 and I brewed a cup of Keurig coffee on my kitchen located on the main floor of my house. I went upstairs to my office and turned on my computer to settle in and realized I forgot the coffee in the kitchen. I went back downstairs and got the coffee as soon as I realized I forgot it. Couldn't have been more than the time it took Windows to boot up, but I took a sip and the coffee was cold. Not warm, but actually cold. I thought my Keurig was broke, but I looked at the clock and it said 9:14. So whereas I expected it to be 8:05 max, somehow an hour and 10 minutes passed without explanation. It was very bothersome. I have no idea where that hour went. I have never had any blackout before or since, no seizures, and the meds I was on shouldn't have caused a lapse like that. I don't think I fell asleep because I distinctly remember typing my password and saying out loud, "Shit, I forgot the coffee." It kinda left me uneasy a bit. Nothing like had ever happened to me before or since. I was in my laundry room and I heard someone come up behind me, and I swear they whispered. I screamed so loud and thought it was my husband playing a prank on me. When I turned around, no one was there, and it was so freaky. Also, when I was a teenager I was sitting in my room at my computer desk and piece of paper and pen went up in the air and slammed back down. I ran downstairs to tell my mom and I was crying hysterically. My mom thinks I just hallucinated it. After my mother died I went to her grave a few times a week. I usually had my kids with me, and this one day as we passed all the older cemeteries my eldest son, who was 6 at the time, asked, "Mom, what are all those people waiting for? Why are they just standing there?" The cemetery was empty and not a single human was there. When we got to my mom's grave he held my hand and said, "Don't worry, Grandma is with Mom and they are happy." Mom was my mother's sister who passed away before my husband and I were even married. My son knew nothing of her or what we called her. He also would tell us when someone had died in a house. I have one. It must have been some kind of hallucination, but it really scared me. I was sitting in my bed watching YouTube for a couple hours. I got up and reached forward to set something on my nightstand or whatever. I had this strange undescribable feeling that I hadn't actually moved from where I was sitting at all. I quickly turned around and looked at where I was sitting seconds before, and there I was, still sitting there. I was outside my body. I could see the shocked, horrified expression come to my face at such a strange sight. I quickly sat back down right in the same spot, and nothing strange happened again. After my dad passed away, my stepmom kept asking me if I found the book he was reading in his last months. She didn't know the title. We looked all over the house for it. Eventually found it with a stack of magazines, definitely not where it belonged in the house. My stepmom recognized it immediately when found. The title of the book was Hello from Heaven. I also received a phone call 2 days after he passed away. The phone call was from his phone number. For some reason I was too scared to answer. Asked the only person who had the phone, stepmom, if she had called from it. She said she left it in the garage where he always worked. This was 14 years ago. I still regret not answering the phone. When I was 13, I woke up in the middle of the night to a strange man's voice. I couldn't understand what he was saying because he was talking really fast, but at one point I heard it say my brother's name, and then it started laughing maniacally. My dad heard it too and came running into my room and turned the lights on. No one was there. Absolutely no explanation. Another time, I woke up in the middle of the night and I heard what sounded like a cult gathering right outside my window. It was like 3 a.m. and I could just very clearly hear a group of people singing, chanting while a baby wailed. After about 10 to 20 minutes, it suddenly stopped. My father died and his favorite animal was a red cardinal. I see those birds visit me no matter where I am. We had a rental house with a ghost in it. Wasn't a bad ghost. He smelled like marijuana a bit and he would come sit on the bed. Multiple tenants reported seeing the same thing. I used to live in a town that was pretty strange altogether, but the house was even more so. Most of my elder family that grew up there have also had weird experiences. I remember one time, I got up to use the toilet, the bathroom was next door, which was across the way from my bedroom, and I shit you not, a woman in a full vintage nurse's outfit came running out of the bathroom with a washcloth and into my bedroom. I have no idea if there used to be a poorly person accommodating it years ago, but the house was very old. That is the good side of it though, there's a lot more, you'd even sit there sometimes and have this awful feeling of a bad presence. As if somebody was staring at you, eyes burning into your soul kind of feeling, you know? Freaky stuff. Unsure if it's a haunted house or more of something becoming attached to me. Not long after I met my current boyfriend I would spend the night at his house. Normally I fall asleep as soon as I hit the pillow, but at his house, I would be awake super late feeling creeped out. I blamed it on being in a strange house. After a while I used to fall asleep at a decent time, but I would wake up 2 to 3 a.m. and try to let my eyes adjust to the darkness. Small town equals very little light pollution. Once I would adjust, I felt like I could see a little boy on top of the grandfather clock. This would happen every night for a while. I never felt scared, just confused. It looked like a boy wearing older style pajamas kicking his legs on top of the clock. Still I would blame it on sleep paralysis, dreaming, or my imagination. When I would go back to my parents' house for the school nights I would start waking up in the middle of the night, seeing the same apparition sitting on the dresser or ledge in my room. I slept alone in the basement of the house. After months of seeing the little boy I wanted to sleep upstairs again, as I figured my mind was just getting to me. One evening I was home alone as my brother and parents were gone to some appointment. I happened to fall asleep on the couch in the living room, only to dream that the little boy was knocking down my mom's ornaments that were on the coffee table. I woke up in a cold sweat and looked at the table. Sure enough, the ornaments were broken. Of course they could have been broken beforehand and I never noticed. It started to get chilly in the living room, so I moved to my mother's bedroom to watch TV before they came home. In her bedroom I kept seeing stuff out of the corner of my eye that looked like the little boy, but never really had a full-on view. At this point I was sure it wasn't sleep paralysis dreaming because I could move when I woke up and sometimes I would be wide awake. I fell asleep in my mom's bed and woke up to the little boy laughing and running in the closet. Friday of that week I went to my boyfriend's house and he knew something was up, but I wouldn't tell him out of fear that he would think I was crazy. That night I was helping his mom bake and I happened to mention that I was having really weird dreams about a little boy and she asked me if he was a young one with his jammies on. She knew what I was talking about. She told me that their house was pretty old and all throughout the time they lived there strange stuff would happen, such as stuff being moved or hearing voices or laughter, but the past 6 to 8 months things had stopped happening. It's been 3 years and I've moved out with my boyfriend to start post-secondary. Still seeing, sensing, dealing with whatever it is. Things being moved, voices. Happened like a month ago at like 10 p.m. I heard tapping on my window and then the power went out. Mine's not crazy scary, but it is true. I was in the living room with my grandma, we were the only ones home. She was working on a crossword puzzle and I was messing around on my iPad. TV was off, windows were closed. All of a sudden, clear as day, I hear my name being whispered, but since it was so quiet it sounded loud. I looked up to my grandma, thinking it was her, asking her if she said something. She said no, but I heard your name. I was 10 years old. It was a Sunday morning, between 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. My mother was in the kitchen preparing lunch. As she was washing the veggies, the water pressure from the tap started to fluctuate. Water would flow, stop flowing, like someone was playing around with the tap. My mom asked out aloud on who's messing with the water pressure. The valve for the water tank was just outside my house and my dad went to inspect it and I followed him. Nothing was out of place. As we walked back into the house we saw before our very eyes bloody chicken claw prints emerge one by one. It's like a chicken with bloodied feet walked through the hole. Except there was no chicken. Freaked me the fuck out, but we were just stunned and stood there staring as one footprint emerged after another. There were about 5 or 6 claw prints in all before it stopped. Everyone in my family saw it. We didn't discuss it immediately. My parents just wiped the claw prints off. What made this event worse was the fact that it occurred during a very turbulent period in my household. My mom had schizophrenia, but at that point she wasn't diagnosed yet. She heard voices in her head, hostile voices, and was convinced that there was a grand conspiracy against her and people were planning to kidnap me and my sister. She didn't trust my father, her mother and her siblings. So when something legitimately paranormal happens, it just fucks everything up. Like in a world where bloody chicken prints appear, why wouldn't there be some occult conspiracy? Those few months were the most traumatic of my childhood. My mom was admitted into a psychiatric facility a few weeks later after being diagnosed with schizophrenia. But dealing with her paranoia and violent outbursts against everyone not her children broke my world. Part of me even believed her. Having some legit paranormal shit happening in the middle of the day didn't help at all. 17 years on, she is still on medication, but she is stable and fully functional. Even when she was going through the worst of her schizophrenic episodes, she was never neglectful. Always loving towards her children, always dutiful. But she was overprotective during those times. I was afraid that I'd get schizophrenia because it is somewhat hereditary. My mom's sister became quite unstable a couple of years ago. To complete the double jeopardy of insanity, my dad's sister also had paranoia, and her son was admitted for a manic episode. So this propensity for psychotic disorders on both sides of the family tree has made me pretty resolute on not getting married and having kids. Sorry that this post has veered from bloody chicken prints to me offloading about schizophrenia. I never told any friend or GF about it, so I guess I just took this as a chance to vent. Upvoting because I really love these posts and read them every damn time. Hope it takes off. Edit. Might as well share one. I didn't see a ghost until I was 19 years old and did not believe in them until then. I had the mentality that I'll believe it when I see it. I was at my friend's rental house who had a baby and they kept talking about how their house was haunted. Particularly the room the baby slept in and that a woman would be seen in white walking into the baby's room at night. A few times my friend, the husband, would be alone with the baby at night while the wife was at work and see the women walk by the open door in the hallway towards the baby's room while the baby slept. He wouldn't think anything of it at first because he would think it was his wife, then he would remember Shess at work and haul ass to the baby's room, only to find the kid crying and no one there. Fast forward to my encounter. I was hanging out with my friend, the wife, at their house while my friend, the husband, was at work and helping out watching the baby. Starting hearing a ton of noises and my friend said she just wanted to get the kid, get in the car and leave. I laughed and tried to tell her it was nothing, but I complied. We get to the car and she tells me she forgot the dog and asked if I could go back and get him. I approach the window at the front of the house, peer into it and see the dog standing at the sliding glass door, completely stiff with its tail pointing straight out, barking his ass off. I then look at the reflection and my heart skips several beats as I see the bottom half of a reflection of a woman in white. I nope out of there and tell her I can't go in there and tell her what I saw. We eventually go back inside once the dog slowed on the barking. I was a true believer in ghosts since that days and have had a couple other encounters. When I was a kid, I took up leatherwork after we did a bit in Cub Scouts. Every time I was using dyes or finishes in the basement, I thought someone was staring at me. Then one day, while dyeing leather, I felt this weird pinch in my shoulder and I involuntarily turned in my chair. That night, 4 finger-shaped bruises showed up on that shoulder. I don't believe in the paranormal, but kid me was convinced my parents' house was haunted. I never did find a good explanation for the bruises, though. When I was about 5 to 8, I had a little ghost girl that I played with. We played board games and she carried around a small stuffed bunny. My parents saw game pieces move when no one was there, but I saw her. They also saw her on occasion. One night our house caught on fire. Electric short in the kitchen, parents called 911 etc. Firemen said the fire melted a pipe in under the sink and put itself out. There was soot everywhere. When we came back the next day, written about little girl level in the soot on the kitchen wall, it said I did it, no one had been in since the fire. It was just after I'd turned 22, I was stuck in some tiny village in the northeast countryside at the time for work. Anyway, as a result, I'd basically postponed any real celebrations until I was home the next week. I decided to just have a few drinks in the local village pub to celebrate with my coworker in the meantime. It was about 9:30 when my coworker checked out and headed to the B&B. I told him I'd have one more and head there too. It seemed to just be me, the bartender and some old farmers hunched around the table to the back of the place at that point. I was drinking my drink when I felt an extreme wisp of cold bite the back of my neck. I thought someone must have left the door open and a draft had gotten in, so I looked around, but no, it was closed. When I looked back, I jumped because a stranger was sitting next to me where there was definitely nobody before. He must have been quiet too because I never heard so much as a creak from him walking to the chair, and believe me, this place was old enough that putting your drink down made it creak. The stranger saw I'd noticed him and looked at me. His face looked very plain. I couldn't tell you how old he was, anywhere from 25 to 40, very blonde hair, almost white. He was wearing strange clothes, black streaked with red and yellow, some kind of velvet and cloth stitched together, I think. His eyes were the weirdest, it was like his eyes were huge, made his eyes look like they were almost completely black. At the time I thought he might be one of the hippie types from the city who went to the country to get high and dance in fields or some bullocks, and he just stumbled into the pub. The stranger said, "Hello John Smith, do you wish you were celebrating?" Which was obviously very fucking weird. I never told him my name, nor that I had a reason to celebrate. Still, I wasn't about to tell him to fuck off and make a scene. So I tried to make conversation. Here's what I remember from that point on. He spoke with a weird accent and told me his name was Maphinus, at least I think that's what he said it was. He told me he knew how to fix people. I asked if he was a doctor or something. He laughed and said doctors wish they had my talent. I didn't push the issue. Dude was freaking me out at this point. He told me he'd lived in the area all his life, which I doubted based on his accent. I asked if other people in the pub knew him. He said, "Oh no, but I know them, from here and there and around and around." At this point I'd noticed he had very unusual, square-cut teeth. Not the normal thin rectangular type you expect people to have, but these thick, almost completely square, wide teeth. The tips of all of them were smooth and flat, even the molars. Every time he smiled, which was whenever he talked about himself, they showed. I finished my drink and told him I was leaving. I got up and as I was walking to the door, I felt a huge grip on my arm. I turned back and his hand was grabbing it, his face was completely emotionless, he was just looking at me. I remember I could feel his fingernails on my arm through my jacket, long and hard. From what I glanced of them, they reminded me of the fingernails of somebody who suffers with bad psoriasis, yellowed and gnarled. He must have had a tighter grip than I felt at the time, because I had 5 small bruises from his fingers on my arm days later. Half angry and half scared, I told him to let go. He told me to steer clear of my coworker's name on the road. Then let go. I quickly got the duck out of there and left. I never saw Maphinus again. I was only in the village a few more days, then I was heading back to my hometown. Of course, my car had crapped out on me. My coworker offered to drive me back since my hometown was on the way to his city. I thought about it, but I didn't really want to leave my car. I had to stay in the village an extra night to get the car fixed, and I steered well clear of the pub lest I see any strangely dressed weirdos again. I drove home, celebrated my birthday for real, and all was well. Then I got a call a few days later from work. My coworker had died in a car crash as he drove back from the village we were working in. I don't like to think about it, to be honest. Nor do I like to tell people about it. I feel so bad for his family. I didn't even know him that well, but I still feel awful. Maybe I could have done something, somehow. The logical answer is this was all a coincidence. Still, it makes me feel very uneasy to this day. My niece was sitting in the kitchen doing her homework. I was outside playing PVZ on my phone, and my mom was doing laundry or something. I heard an awful crashing noise, and I ran inside to see dishes shattered all over the kitchen encircling my niece. We asked her what happened, and she said the dishes came flying at her. There was no way she could have done it because, like I said, the dishes were circled around her, and she couldn't have sat down that quickly. It was weird. I have experienced plenty of weird stuff, and it usually doesn't bother me, but there is something around the area I live in currently. It's pale, tall, and built like a stick. Everything seems scared of it. It usually shows up around dusk and then slinks off at dawn. Whenever it's around, the animals will hide and or freak out. I know that it has come up to our windows before, and I know it stalked me at least once. My automatic assumption when I first encountered it was mountain lion, but I have seen it since then, and it walks on 2 legs but crouched and runs like an animal. If this was a bear, it would not be so stick-like. It's unexplained and possibly paranormal. I hope it's not paranormal because some larger livestock have gone missing only to be found shredded later. And no, it can't be coyotes. Even the coyotes are scared of this thing. On the day my father died, I was alone in the apartment we lived in. While everyone was out mourning at my uncle's, I stayed home because I didn't want people to stare at me sobbing. Anyways, I'm in the living room and I hear footsteps in my mother's room that has a balcony. I straight up hear the balcony door open, so now I'm like sobbing and shouting asking who's there. I go check it out, and there's no one there except a strong smell of tobacco in the room. My father used to smoke on the balcony. Never told anyone about it and just kept it for myself. Later learned my mother got blamed for my dad's death, even though they loved each other since they were teens, and my dad was simply a victim of cancer, and a massive brawl broke out, so I just thought of it as my dad coming home because he couldn't be bothered to hear people arguing. On the way home from a wedding with my partner who was driving and the kids flat out after picking them up from the babysitter. I was stone cold sober because I didn't think it would be fair for me to drink if he was driving. We were really close to home when I saw some kind of light flash just ahead of us, as did my partner, so he slowed right down. When I looked up, I swear to God all I could see was the underside of a plane, as if it was just about to land behind us. I said it in such a panic that my partner stopped the car suddenly. When I told him in a slightly less panicky voice. He just stared at me as if I just lost the plot. Where we were, you would have difficulty flying a little drone, never mind a giant plane. We drove on around 200 meters, with me saying I swear to God it was a dark green color, and I could see the two landing gears towards the back. My partner just stopped the car in the middle of the road, and I looked. It was like there were two little balls of fire floating above us, about 2 stories high, in front of the car. We jumped out, it was safe, no traffic. All you could smell was burning, and it got really foggy, but it started off as 2 floating balls of fire, but when we looked around you could see loads through the fog. We watched them for about 2 minutes, and then all of a sudden they all flew off in different directions. Our house was 2 minutes away. We got the kids inside, then went online to see if we could figure it out, but we couldn't. I once saw lights in the sky I couldn't explain at first. It was about 11 p.m. on a hot muggy July night around 1998, and there were these fireballs shooting across the sky. Like 20 of them with these flaming trails. These magnificent streaming fireball tails just flying across the sky. At first I thought they were cruise missiles. I alerted my companion and we stared at them. In retrospect, I'm certain that it was like meteors that were burning up. I asked people later about it, and nobody else had seen it. But it happened just the same. Okay, so this happened when I was a young teenager. My friends and I loved the paranormal, and we had always wanted to contact ghosts. One day, my guy friend, let's call him Jay, makes a Ouija board and ends up contacting a ghost named A. Seemed paranoid for his safety whenever Jay talked to him, so we decide to have a group Ouija board session. We come prepared to make sure we have a safe session: candles, salt, lavender. We didn't have any sage. We start the session, and immediately, things go wrong. The ghost we contact is called T. Immediately after we contact him, an air of uneasiness filled the room. We ask what he is, and he spells out proxy on the board. After researching, we found that proxy is someone which represents for someone else. He represents something much more evil. Right about then, we hear a loud bang from the closet. My 2 friends, J and P, go over to look. I stay behind, as to not end the session without saying goodbye. They both come running out screaming. P says that they saw a tall, skinny, all-black shadow creature with white eyes and tiny pupils. We all freak out and end the session there. We go upstairs to get holy water, and when we come back, the board and the stuff around it had been thrown across the room, with everything a mess, and the planchette, which we had taken off the board, right back on it. Subsequent investigations revealed that A comes in darkness and T comes in light. So we always kept the lights out so we could talk to A. They also revealed that T wants to drain the essence of my 2 friends, who share a last name, but aren't related. We all are really worried, so we keep an eye out for anything unusual. The most we got was more sightings of T from time to time, as well as a ghost that was the inverse of T, all white, with black eyes and white pupils. We thought it was A, trying to protect us. Eventually, we get the house smudged and the sightings stop. We've all moved on, but it still gives me the shakes when I think about it. My husband and I constantly hear each other calling out for the other. For example, he will be in the garage and will hear me saying babe? Or his name. I will hear him say baby cakes? Or my name, or any variation of our names or nicknames. It will also happen when one of us isn't home. We will also hear the other messing around in a room that we aren't in, like he will hear me in my office when I'm actually sitting in the bath on the opposite side of the house, or again, not even home. It seems harmless, but feels ominous, if that makes any sense. This has followed us to 4 or 5 houses apartments. Yay, military life. We wonder if it's something that is attached to one of us or to one of the many items that we've gotten second, third, fourth hand. Either way, now that we're in a fairly permanent place and it's still with us, I fully intend to smudge our home with sage and Palo Santo. I am pretty sure I have posted this story somewhere before, but this is usually my go-to. I grew up in a small Midwestern town in a state largely comprised of flat farmland. If you took the old highway east of town maybe 6 or 7 miles, you could take a left on a gravel road, and about a mile into that you would just barely see a trail leading farther into the plot. Up here most trees outside of towns are used for shelter against the wind since the state is so flat. So with the length of the trail and the trees bunched up, the long-ass grass didn't help around any buildings, you wouldn't really see what was back there if you only driving by. But of course most of us kids knew there was an old abandoned house back there, so a lot of teenagers went exploring and reported back stories. The rumor was that maybe in the 70s a man killed his wife and kid in that house, and then himself. This of course was the story running around the high school anyway, so it isn't exactly reliable. But it was enough to get the gears going, you know? Kind of like a local ghost story that was all ours, and since I was super into ghosts at the time, and still am, but not in a sexual way or anything, it was enough to get my imagination running. I think the year was 1999, and I was working at the local McDonald's. Teens often took the closing shifts, and a lot of us would hang out at the lake after close or find something to do together. One night we decided to gather a posse to go out and explore this house, so we bought some flashlights from the gas station and headed out. It was just about 1 a.m. when our 9-person group got to the trail. I can't remember exactly how far back the actual buildings were, but it seemed like a long way, and you definitely couldn't see anything else but fields. The first structure we saw was a little lean-to with a tarp flapping, then as you turned a corner a barn and a house. Now I would never claim to be some incredibly brave man, but I will admit that walking through the barn by myself was actually sort of calming, but still in a bit of an unnerving way. The entire back wall of the barn was gone, so you were basically looking out across a moonlit wheat field. Just a really cool scene that I wish I could have taken a picture of. The house was not as calming. First, tons of deviants had already been here, and they had spray-painted words all over. Some dirty words here and there, but also stuff about reading your Bible and random religious phrases that made it kind of creepy, especially at night. Right after you enter the doorway, there are stairs going down to the left, which lead down to a landing and then turns for a few steps. We went down to the landing to check it out, but the floor was flooded at least a foot, but closer to 2. The main floor was pretty messed up, with the walls ripped out and graffiti all over, but the layout wasn't without its charm. You could actually picture a family living there. The stairs going up were above those going down and lead to a small upstairs room. There were a few kids' shoes laying around, along with some books. What spooked us at first was the blood that was splattered by the window, but we would later learn that some other friends had shot a raccoon there. Eventually we made our way downstairs and heard some rustling in the trees nearby, so started quickly making our way out of the door. Now I don't know what was happening, but somehow the line out of the door got held up, and my friend Chris and I were the last two, right near the downstairs hall. I looked down at one point as someone accidentally aimed a flashlight and saw an arm with a red sleeve extending up to the landing, and briefly a brown shoe stepping up. The line had unjammed at this point, and we had all raced to the vehicles to get the hell out of there. Chris had made an unfortunate wrong turn out of the door and into some trees full of spider webs. He ran back and we got the hell out of there, and later I found out that Chris saw the same thing. We thought maybe it was just some guy, but we went downstairs when we got there and didn't see anything, plus you probably would have heard somebody sloshing around in the water. That bothered us both for some time, and we do talk about it occasionally. About 5 years ago my husband and I went to visit his grandma. Big, beautiful 2-story house. I was going to head upstairs to put some pajamas on and saw a woman walk across the top of the stairs. It was only my husband, young daughter and his grandma in the house, and whoever I saw wasn't Granny. I went in the living room and told them what I saw, and his grandma goes, "Yeah, that's Laurie. She visits a lot." Laurie was my husband's mom who had died when he was 11. I was so fucking spooked after that I barely slept the rest of the time we were there. When I was in junior high school, I was good friends with a girl who had some mental health issues. She was smart, but had been held back due to absenteeism, whether that was due to appointments, hospitalizations, truancy, not sure. She frequently talked about jinn, a type of demon in her culture. She grew up in Iraq, and her family had been persecuted. She might have had PTSD, recalling some other behaviors. She was completely positive jinn had followed her from Iraq, and it was why her family was haunted by bad luck, her father's anger, their poverty, her mother's sickness, her own nightmares, failing grades, and sadness. She saw jinn everywhere, dark shadows all around our high school and classroom. Sometimes I couldn't find her at lunch because she'd just lock herself in the bathroom and wouldn't come out until they were gone. I went to her house for a sleepover once and saw flickers of shadows in my periphery all evening. The air felt thick and oppressive, and when I woke up in the middle of the night, there was a silhouette standing over me. I pretended to be asleep and it was gone in the morning. Obviously, in retrospect, I saw those things because her house was dark and her mother was a hoarder, items piled across the windows and everything covered in dust. And the silhouette was a family member. But at the time, because my friend always ranted and raved with such conviction about misfortune from the jinn, I was convinced it was an unexplained event.